these bigger publishers looking to the stuff that the smaller ones are doing and kind of like developing that. So I think that the future of magazine publishing just has to be based on ideas. And so I'm going to work through these 5 examples of big ideas. Mitch, just remind, what time do you want us to stop talking?
1 o'clock.
What's that? 2 o'clock. Okay. Sorry, I ran over my 20 minutes already. Just before we get into it, does anyone here recognise any of the titles here? Which ones are you picking out as ones you know? Serial, okay. Massive magazine, done phenomenal work, and based really like on the quality of its content. Anyone else put their hands up? No? Okay, all right. We'll get straight into it. I've got copies of all the magazines here, so we can start sort of like, I know it's dark in here, but we can kind of like pass them around as I'm talking and get a sense of what I'm talking about. So Weapons of Reason is not normally square. It's normally a bit more rectangular than that. So Weapons of Reason is a magazine that literally just launched this week. It was kind of conceived as a magazine to change the world. The guy who launched it is Danny Miller. He is the guy who started Little White Lies years and years ago. Doesn't work for Little White Lies anymore, but does run a creative agency called Human After All. And I actually used to work with Danny at Human After All. And we were doing work for clients there, like kind of the World Economic Forum, Google, Facebook, these big kind of organisations. And we were seeing that there was a real kind of appetite for discussing the big issues facing the world. We'd made this thing for the World Economic Forum called the, what's it called now? Oh God, it's over a year ago, I can't remember what we called it. But basically it was about a magazine focusing on the big challenges facing the world. But of course, because they're the World Economic Forum, they have to do it in a very particular way for a very serious business audience. And Danny basically got the idea from hearing Al Gore speak at South by Southwest. There are all these massive challenges facing the world, but unless you're spending all your time and effort really focusing on what these challenges are and how to solve them, you can't really engage with it, you can't really sort of contribute to it yourself. So he basically wanted to take Human After All's communication skills and try to make it a bit easier for people to engage. So each issue focuses on a different particular problem the world is facing. This one is based in the Arctic. As you can see here, just from the cover, I talked to Dan about this the other day, and he was saying that one of the prerequisites for a magazine cover is it just needs to be stunning. It just needs to look beautiful right from the start. And with this one, they've gone for something that I think is very striking, but they also wanted something that kind of was very simple. And so, if you look at this, it almost looks kind of like a children's storybook. It looks like that simple, and that's very intentional. The illustration here by Adrian Johnson is basically intended to kind of represent what's happening in the Arctic. So essentially, the ice is melting at the top there, and it's because it's driven by our greed for oil, which is underneath the Arctic. And Danny's idea is that people glancing at that may not get that straight away, but hopefully, as they read it and keep coming back to it, they'll get more and more from it, and the cover will kind of reveal more and more as we go. So they've made illustration a really key part of what they're doing. Now, with Little White Lies, that was always the case. It was a necessity, because when they were starting Little White Lies, they didn't have the money for expensive photography of Hollywood stars. They certainly couldn't get access to Hollywood stars. And so basically the thing they did have is access to talented illustrators, as in they were talented illustrators. And so illustration for them was kind of just the way they had to tell their stories. Now it's much more of a choice. And so now they basically look at illustration as a way of kind of really setting the tone with something. So, something like that which you can kind of glance at and get the meaning of is kind of engaging the reader and telling them something about the kind of editorial perspective on the story, without really bashing someone over the head and saying, like, you know, kind of, this is our opinion on, like, you know, this is where we think we're going with this. I'll pass this around actually so that it's really important that the magazine is kind of like a smaller format as well. They wanted something that was very kind of almost sort of like a guide, so you could kind of like take it with you, take it places, not kind of something of this sort of size where you feel like you have to be a bit careful with it. They went to experts like Lawson Brigham is this kind of an Arctic expert that we met through the World Economic Forum work. But whereas you wouldn't normally come across this kind of thoughts and ideas except in sort of like a broadsheet newspaper, with this kind of illustration it makes it much more sort of like human and accessible. So there are different types of illustration in the magazine, I was going to say. This is what the type that Dan talks of as kind of like the sort of like the visual thinking kind of approach. So basically this is done by one of the in-house illustrators, a guy called Eve Lloyd Knight. But they've got Jean Julien has done something for them. Adrian Johnson, as you've seen. He also talks about Noam Bar as like an example of one of these illustrators that has this kind of like visual thinking style. So something where you can look at an incredibly simple image, but you can tell that an awful lot of thought has gone into that, into the creation of the image, to get a message across very, very simply. So that's one style of illustration, and then they've got the other style of illustration now, which is much more kind of like a traditional sort of infographic. And so for this one, this kind of like comes quite early in the magazine, and it essentially introduces you to the Arctic at a glance. And this is the sort of thing that, like, as it comes around to you, like, do have a look, because I found when I saw this, you sort of eye goes over it, you're like, okay, I get that, I'm looking at the world top down, that's a view of the Arctic. But then you start looking at like the key for what these things are. And basically like this side, you've got the different kind of like tribes of people who live there, and like where they're distributed. And over here you have like the really important kind of breeding grounds and sort of like, you know, spawning areas for fish and stuff like that. And just getting that sort of view of the Arctic right at the beginning of the magazine, before you really sort of get an awful lot else, I think is a really effective way of just initiating you into it. And then of course like these areas here, crossed areas, have the sort of like the oil reserves. So straight away you can see, before they've really done an awful lot else, you can see kind of the essential tension that's happening here between natural resources and like people and wildlife, all essentially being kind of in the same place. But I imagine for Aberdeen you're kind of used to that here. You're sort of used to oil being right where you are. So, Weapons of Reason, it's very much about illustration. The Recorder is a new magazine which is very much about typography. Any type fans in this afternoon? Okay, there we go. So typography, I normally find to be completely impenetrable, because I don't have like design education. Anytime I see a typography talk, I'm like, what, really? So because of like the upsweep on that E, so that makes it a different, no, I don't get it. So it's kind of bizarre, and it's so like kind of built in around like this history of type. I just don't get. But The Recorder is a new magazine that's come out. It's published by Monotype. So The Recorder is actually a very old magazine. It's been going for over 100 years, and it was started by the company that made the Monotype machines years and years and years ago. And basically, it's been sort of sporadically published over the years, but Monotype have revived it. And the editor was talking to me recently about how she really wanted to make this subject way more approachable. So for an idiot like me who doesn't know anything about it, you know, I can actually get something out of this magazine. This is just the most wonderful example. You put your hand up, so I'll start. Let's start with you. This is the most fantastic gatefold the magazine. So it opens right out, and each of these is a different full stop, different type of full stop in a different font. And it was actually, the idea was taken from an exhibition that Monotype ran last year, where they basically took this gallery space and they covered like the ceilings and walls with different like full stops. But I think that to take this, to take that concept and sort of port it to the magazine, where you get this brilliant like sort of fold out gatefold, that does more for me in terms of communicating the differences in typefaces than 10,000 words about, like, you know, kind of the infinitesimal differences. Because you can just look at a form that is as simple as a full stop, and yet seeing the amount of variation that's in there, and the different families and all the rest of it, I just find absolutely fascinating. And I think that you know, when you're making magazines, you are a visual communicator, whether you like it or not. And I think if you can do something like this and really get your message across with that sort of simplicity, I just think it's absolutely fantastic. I was going to put another answer there, so I was going to try and find a new image for that. The other thing that they did is they really kind of pushed the more sort of like experimental typography. So there's a magazine, a shop in the magazine in Berlin called, I think it's like Type is My Friend or something like that, which was set up around the idea that they wanted to make sort of like a record shop, but for typography. So that not only kind of, you know, people who are really into the subject would engage with it, but even just sort of tourists who are passing by on a Berlin street would kind of go, what's that, sort of wander in and get sort of like immersed in this typography. So in the magazine, they've really pushed it with kind of, in that story, for example, they use some really quite experimental typography. In other places, they use some really quite hard to read typography. And you know, she was saying she was pretty sure they'd get a fair amount of kind of pushback from some of Monotype's more traditional customers for that. But I think it's great that they're like trying to open this subject up and make it not just about the specialists. Okay, next big idea. So we've had illustration, typography. This one's photography, but in a very particular way. This is Brewster, a magazine from Australia. And the concept of Brewster is to be kind of a travel magazine. But it doesn't just travel in space, it also travels through time. And it does that because the guys behind it figured out that there are all these, in sort of like, you know, image libraries around the world, these vintage stereoscopic images. And the stereoscope was like the first portable 3D viewing device. It's kind of like a set of binoculars, and you put two images into the little things there, and you view them. When you view it together, they make a 3D image. And they figured out that if they took those separate images, ran them through Photoshop, isolated the red and the blue channels, and then found like a sort of a meeting, like sort of the point that's going to be like really standing out, they can make modern 3D images. So again, with the lights down, this will be kind of slightly less effective. But take a look, there's a set of 3D glasses in there. And so basically you end up with this magazine that is full of images that look really cool just viewed, you know, as flat images as they are. But you put the glasses on and they completely pop out, and you just literally see this sort of like late 19th century scenes really coming to life. So this was the first issue. This was based around a national park in New Zealand. The one that's coming out now is the second issue, which is literally out this week, and that's based, struggling with 3D quality. That's based in Japan. And so whereas with the first one, they managed to find a single piece of writing, sort of like a travel log journal from the late 19th century about this national park in New Zealand. And so they used that one piece of writing to run through the whole magazine with all the images. One of the things about making a magazine like this is that you're constrained. So normally, if you want to cover a subject, you commission the writing, you commission the photography or illustration, and go where you want it, whereas they sort of work backwards. So they start by looking to see what images are available, and then they look to find what bits of text can they find, and then they sort of pair it together. I actually think it works better for just a single long travel log, but then, you know, beggars can't be choosers, I guess. It's a really, really clever project, really lovely, very, very small, and a great example of something where, you know, this needs to be in print. I made a review video of the latest issue published last week, and on screen you just don't get it. You just don't. These images, they don't really mean so much on screen. Whereas when you're sitting with a paper magazine and a set of 3D glasses in your hand, it makes it so much more. And so I think it's clever to recognise that and play to its strengths. And then colours. So I think, was this one of the ones that, oh no, it's Serial, wasn't it? So Colours is a magazine that was published, or it's been published by the Benetton Foundation. And Nick and I were talking just at the start, and he was like, you know, it's got some kind of vintage copies from the 90s, where it was really known as kind of, it was a magazine that was all about, so war was in there a lot, kind of AIDS, these big kind of confrontational subjects, and they used a really clever visual storytelling approach to sort of really challenge people and show people stuff they weren't used to seeing. I actually haven't been a massive fan of it for a long time, but then a new editor took over, a guy called Patrick Waterhouse, and he's just doing amazing stuff. So he's basically continuing the visual storytelling approach, but kind of moving it on a step. So I'm just going to show you a video for this. This was their, send it around. This is the issue they put out for the World Cup. And the entire magazine, as you flip through it, is kind of conceived around like Panini football cards. So that's why you've got like the gold, kind of like, you know, the shinies on the front, which is the thing that you always wanted from football cards. And each of the teams in here is kind of like treated as if they were a team in a football card. But the teams are just like the most amazing cross-section of people playing football you could ever imagine. And you're going to struggle to describe this, so I've got a video to help me. So this is the video they made to promote it.
32 teams, one gold trophy, the most beautiful game on earth. In Colours 90 Football, featuring Sunday Amateurs, a secret Saudi club, a team of 2,300 players learning to play like Real Madrid. Scorpion kicks, bicycle kicks, and a kick in the balls. Terry Henry taking a break after scoring a goal. And this man breaking his neck after scoring a goal. A player in a balaclava and a pack of stickers. Even a shiny one. Cristiano Ronaldo, Balotelli, and someone with a haircut like Neymar's. Blind striker. A team with guns, a team without guns, a team with arthritis, a team without legs, priests, albinos, grannies, lesbians, Tibetans, and robots. A field with 3 sides, a field with skewed sides, and a field with a hole in the middle. Commentator, screaming, praying, crying, and a city in Iran where everything is about Brazil, including the falafels. Colours 90 Football, out now.
Amazing.
So this is, you look like a football fan, I'll start with you. So this, you got to remember, like, this came out in the summer, which is when, like, you know, all the magazines, in fact, everyone was talking about was football, and yet Colours managed to find a way of doing it, of covering football, covering that subject in a way that nobody else was doing it, and it's entirely down to that kind of visual storytelling style. So you'll see as you flick through the magazine, really the whole thing is just one long story. You know, it's not that, you know, one starts and one begins, one ends. It's like you're literally watching like an entire league team of these amazing football stories from all around the world. fantastic piece of work and well worth checking out. And finally, Serial magazine. So this is one across that you'd said to me seen before. So Serial is it started out as a travel and food magazine, and then they kind of realised that, you know, food was kind of nice, but they weren't experts in food. Travel was the thing that they were really passionate about. And so this is run by Rosa Park and her boyfriend Rich Stapleton. They run it from an office in Bristol. They've been doing it for almost 2 years now, and they've just been phenomenally successful. They're, you know, kind of this approach of, you know, lots of white space, very calm, refined. This is the thing that's flying off shelves at the moment. And so this is why we're starting to see lots of imitations. And not to say that they were the first ones doing it, you know, Kinfolk were doing this before then, but now you get loads and loads of magazines that really kind of focus on the peacefulness, that sort of white space. So much that it's getting to a point where, you know, people are starting to criticise it and say, no, we want something else. So what is it that's made Serial really kind of ultra successful? Where there are kind of, you know, there are imitators out there. What is it that Serial are doing? And I'd argue that it's in large part to do with their photography, but really to do with the quality of that photography. So this is an example of a story they did in their last issue about Vancouver. So Rosa is actually from Vancouver originally, and she spoke to, when I talked about it, she spoke about the idea that, like, you know, Vancouver is actually this really green city. It's like it's actually a rainforest, but not like a tropical rainforest. And so to get that idea across, they got this guy who'd taken some amazing photographs, like flying over forests. And she was like, yeah, you know, it was incredible. He put so much work into it for us. He actually went up in planes 3 times to do it. And I was like, oh, okay, well, so like these were things he'd done already, right? You know, and no, they commissioned him to go and do that. So this small independent magazine that literally started less than 2 years ago, they went to the trouble of finding a photographer in Canada who could do this stuff, who would charter a plane 3 times to go up and take photographs like this. And it's, you know, when you, again, seeing it like that doesn't really get it across. When you see it on the spread on the page, it's just absolutely beautiful, breathtaking. They live or die by the quality of their content, and they're just putting absolutely everything into making sure that Serial is absolutely without peer. So, you know, there are lots of people trying to copy them, but they want to make sure that people can't do that, which I think is a truly amazing thing. And that's why I decided them to stack recently. So to sum up, everything counts. When you look at these magazines, you know, kind of you have to have quality content, but that's the baseline. So, you know, kind of your design has to look fantastic because people have to pick you up. Your editorial has to be really interesting and have a really kind of original point of view, because otherwise people won't come back to you. But that's just for starters. You know, that's where you've got to begin. After that point, you've got to start adding all these other things on. So, for example, size. So there's a magazine called File, which actually doesn't publish anymore. And they were like large format like this. They were a film magazine, and it came with a DVD so you could watch the films. And it was like a card cover with newsprint inside. Absolutely beautiful, it was gorgeous, but it was too big to go on any shelves. You know, you pour all this time and effort into making something, only for it to be too big to go on any shop shelf, so nobody can sell you. It's the sort of thing that obviously kills a magazine. Name, Boat Magazine. So Boat Magazine is this phenomenal independent travel magazine, travels to a different city around the world every issue, and kind of combines some creatives there to tell this sort of inside-outside story of a place. But because they're called Boat Magazine, they get put in the boating section of shops, which is bad for 2 reasons. So if you're into boats and you go and like pick this magazine up and flip through, you're like, oh, there's no boats in there. And if you're like really into kind of alternative takes on travel, you never even see the magazine because you never look in the boating section. So something that seems to be, and it's called Boat because it's made by Boat Studio, and they have this idea that like, they're a creative studio, and they have this idea that they're quiet in the summer and Christmas every year, so why not use that time to like go off and make something? So it makes perfect sense why they're called boats, but that kind of creative decision has made a massive impact in terms of how many people it can reach. Print run. I mean, print run is the absolute killer. Anyone who's printed magazines before knows it's all about economies of scale. The cost and expense is all in the actual setup of your plates at the beginning. So, you know, once that's all set, you press print, and especially with these big printers these days, like your print run is done in like 5 minutes. And that's why the printer will always say to you, like, oh, so you're printing 2,000 copies, you know, for like another couple of £100, we could do you 3,000. And like at first thought, that's a no-brainer. Well, yeah, of course I'll have 3,000 and 2,000. But the problem is you've got to do something with those magazines once they actually arrive. Now, I know a guy who literally sleeps on his magazines because the only way that he could store the magazines that he printed and couldn't sell is that he had to get rid of his bed frame, put the magazines in the corner of his room and lay a mattress on top of the boxes of magazines. Now, that's not a healthy way. That's not a healthy way to live. But that's what happens if you don't kind of like pay real close attention to stuff like print run. Pagination. You know, you get if you look at sort of the September issue of all like the big fashion magazines. A few weeks ago, I reviewed Documents fashion magazine because I literally went to the shop and picked up the biggest, fattest fashion magazine I could find, and like it's literally a challenge to hold it. Like to read it, you have to put it propped against a lectern like this because your wrists start to give out after a while. That sort of pagination, that, you know, they're obviously trying to say, we are definitive. We are the people to come to if you want to know about what's happening now with style. So that can be the point. Cover price, obviously incredibly important, but not always for the reason people think. I often find, you know, I don't often sell magazines just side by side together because it's normally always subscription, but on the odd times that I do, I'm always surprised that you'll get a magazine that's £6 next to a magazine that's £12, and it's the magazine that's £12 that sells because, you know, I think what you're really trying to do is capture someone's imagination with this, and once you've done that, you know, a calculation like 6 or 12 doesn't necessarily really come into it. And then paper stock. I mean, you know, it's a truism to say that, you know, these days people know that independent magazines are renowned for big, lovely, thick paper stock, which is like so many things in independent publishing are a response to the mainstream. So, you know, whereas on that slide I showed you earlier, the financial crash happened, management consultants moved in and started saying, well, hang on, you're printing on like 100 GSM paper. Well, if you print on 80 GSM paper, you're going to save a lot of money. So, and like, you know, off the top of your head, yeah, okay, there's no argument against that, except obviously you cheapen the product. You make it fundamentally seem less valuable to people. And so the independent magazines have kind of come up in a reaction to that and made stuff that is like ultra valuable, that just you pick it up and you know that there's some real quality here. No detail in this is too small. I've just got, as I said today, I've focused on 5 magazines that I think are kind of relevant for you because of like the visual side of stuff. But you know, you walk into any of these shops, and unfortunately up here, you're not able to do that. But you know, kind of down in London or Manchester or even like in Glasgow, you can actually go into these places and see wall-to-wall magazines. All the ones that are succeeding are doing so because they've managed to figure out this sort of stuff. So that's me. That's me on Twitter and Instagram. Every morning on Instagram, on most mornings on Instagram, I post a picture of the cover that I kind of like at the moment when people comment on it. Google Plus, so the Stack Student Union is a thing that I've just started recently where basically, because I come and do talks like this in lots of places, the Stack Student Union is essentially a Google Plus group which allows you to kind of like come in, you can share the project that you're working on, you can look at what other people are doing, I post my kind of videos and reviews and stuff on there. So it's just a handy place to kind of keep up to date with all that. I'll also make, I'll set you up with a free Stack subscription to come up here so that you can kind of dish magazines out as and when that's kind of you think it's relevant. So basically the Stack Student Union Google Plus group is where you go to keep in touch with all that. And then if you see a magazine that's gone up on there and I say, oh yeah, this is in Stack, you can come to Mick and say, let's have a look at that copy of that magazine. So basically, if you're interested in that, go to Google Plus, search for Stack Student Union, and it's a closed group, so you just need to ask for permission to come in, but I'll let you in straight away. And that's it. And then also, if all this looks interesting, you like these magazines, Christmas is coming up. If you would like a Stack subscription, use the code STUDENT, and you get 10% off. That's it.
Any questions, anybody? Turn the lights on so we can see a bit more. Questions? Nobody?
Maybe you can decide like what magazines to look. Do they come to you or?
Yeah, these days, yeah. When I started, it was me sort of like going to shops and stuff, finding interesting things, and then like contacting the publisher and going, hey, I'm doing this thing. And these days, it's much easier. When people are launching magazines, they tend to send me a copy, so that's nice. But it means I've constantly got a tower of magazines I need to get through. In terms of selection criteria, the main thing is they have to have something to say for themselves. So there are lots and lots of these magazines out there that look lovely. You see them on the shelf, and you're like, oh, okay, fantastic. But you get it home, and you just realise there's not an awful lot going on there. So it has to have something to say for itself. It has to be like open and inclusive, because I'm sending out to thousands of people all around the world, all different types of people. So it's no good if a magazine is like really cliquey. I always use the example of a mountain bike magazine called Albion that used to, it's not around anymore, but they were interested in being on Stack. It looked fantastic, and I tried reading it, and every single article had all this kind of like jargon and stuff that if you didn't write mountain bikes, you just didn't know what was going on. So obviously I can't figure that out. And then it has to be a good balance within the Stack mix. So at the moment there are loads of really good food and drink magazines, so I have to be careful not to just add loads of food and drink magazines, because I don't want it to get to a point where I send you out a food and drink magazine like every month for 3 months. I limit the number of mags to about 30 on the site, because that gives me enough to play with to make sure that I can send something new every month, but also like not. I don't want it to be that people get to the site and go, well, I don't know what magazine I'm going to get, because there are like 50 magazines here. So I try to keep it quite limited, and that forces me to make sure that it's just the best magazines. You know, it has to be really good stuff.
What's your background in terms of education and job before you?
So I did English at university, and while I was at university, my favourite magazine at the time was FHM. So I managed to get a 3-week work experience placement with FHM in the summer of 2000, and went down to London for the first time and had like the best time of my life. It was absolutely brilliant, stupid. And so that was it really. I kept on freelance. I got some stories in from that placement, and then I kept on freelancing for them after that. And then moved down to London after university, took the first editorial job that came my way, and ended up working for a really not very good company making not very good magazines. And it was so basically in doing that, I was kind of being driven up the wall. So I started writing freelance for all the kind of small independent ones, and that's how I sort of got into that independent world.
Anybody else?
With your time being like kind of obsessed with, well, not obsessed, but like
No,
concentrated around magazines, do you ever find that you need like releases from magazines, like go into other formats, or
Oh, what's that, sorry?
like since you're like kind of since you got Stack and all that, you're constantly surrounded by magazines. Do you ever need like release, like go to a different kind of format or Is it just 24/7?
Yeah, do you know what? I actually really miss reading books. Like because I used to love reading books, and now like all my spare time is taken up with reading magazines. So yeah, it would be kind of nice. And I've got a 2-year-old as well, which helps make sure that I cannot completely lose myself. He doesn't really care about magazines, so. Someone had a hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, do you send out the same magazine each month to everyone, or is it, yeah? So,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically when you sign up, you can say, oh actually I already subscribe to Hook magazine. So we sent out Hook this month, so I sent out about 15 alternative magazines to people who already subscribe to Hook. So I've basically got a warehouse in the Midlands where all the magazines go, and I make sure I've got like a small spare stock there that I can send out stuff to other people. But it's not a big number. I think as much as anything, like not a lot of people subscribe to these independent magazines, so it's not a big problem really.
Okay, thank you very much.